Benedicite Dominus, and welcome to question 60 of the Secunda Secundae. The topic for this lesson is judgment. I am Dr. Thibault. We are dealing with the last section within the theme of justice itself. Once we get through justice itself, then we start moving into the parts of justice. We get into commutative and distributive justice, which is an interesting section. So we're just finishing up this last one, judgment. The first article deals with judgment as an act of justice, and I guess fairly clearly, since it's in the section of justice in itself, it is part of justice. And St. Thomas, when he describes it, says a judge, Latin judex, is so called because he asserts the right, the ius, dicens, the right is the object of justice. So because you're dealing with the right, you're dealing with issues of justice. So, and judges in particular, their whole focus is on doing that which is right. When a judge is acting correctly, a judge is acting justly, and if a judge is acting incorrectly, then unjustly. And then if a person who is not a judge is acting, then maybe we have to look at those circumstances, which we'll do here. St. Thomas also quotes Aristotle in stating that a judge is the personification of justice, therefore judgment must be an element of justice. Is a judgment lawful? Is Article 2. And right from the beginning, the objection is the very famous line that even non-Christians probably have heard of before: judge not, and ye shall not be judged. Judge not, lest you be judged, from the Gospel of Matthew. So can we judge one another, since it seems that Jesus himself has told us not to judge? Therefore, should all Christian people be people who do not judge? You can see that that might create a practical problem if none of us can make any type of proper judgments. And this often becomes a course of division within any community, because as soon as somebody makes a statement or a judgment, if you don't like the judgment, then you say, who are you to judge? Right? Or just judge not, lest ye be judged. But then if you are being wronged and nobody's making a judgment, then you get very upset, saying, why isn't anybody making a good decision here? Why isn't anybody properly finding justice in this situation? So it depends on what side you are on the issue, on that particular issue, whether or not you think that a person should be judging or not. If you're the victim, you wish that there was a judgment. If you are the perpetrator, then you don't want to be judged. St. Thomas points out 3 lawful ways in which you can judge, and now this requires all 3 of them to be proper judges. One is it proceeds from the inclination of justice, so therefore it must be aiming at justice. It must be a matter of justice. The determination must be just. If somebody tries to aim at injustice, then clearly it can't be just. So that's the most important one. The next is it comes from one with authority. So now this has many different applications. So a judge clearly has very broad authority, perhaps one of the broadest authorities. If one is brought before a judge by an accuser, then and that judge has been put there into authority by the prince, by the king, by the government, then the person has proper authority. Now, there's other times that people judge that when they are not officially, quote unquote, judges, But what would be required would be proper authority. So, for example, if you owned this and you had employees and there was a problem among employees, then who would have the proper authority to make a judgment in terms of that business? Well, the owner of the company or whoever has been uh, properly designated by the company in order to make those types of decisions, perhaps HR or something like that. Um, Within a family, it would be the parents, right? They would have the authority um, to judge the children. That would be the proper authority. Within the church, the pastor of the church, or the bishop of the diocese, or the vicar of Christ for the larger church, right? The church councils, they have proper authority over the issues dealing with the church and issues of morality and faith. So it depends on many things. A general has authority over the military. Police officers have authority over keeping the peace. So there's many different elements of this, right? As many relationships as there are, there's usually one person who is in a greater authority than another. So who does not have authority? Well, it would be equals don't have authority over one another, typically. Um, and employees don't have authority over their bosses, right? There is a proper ordering and a hierarchy within this issue of authority. So if one is properly judging, one must have authority to judge. Uh, and lastly, that it is pronounced according to the right rulings of prudence, which tend to mean very basically that one has evidence of some kind, that one has proof that one has made a uh, good judgment based on good reasoning. Now, the vices that are connected with each of these three are the first one, that one is not even acting justly to begin with. The opposite of that would be to be unjust, definitionally equal, and otherwise more commonly called perverted. So it would be perverted justice. It would not be proper justice. It would be perverted justice, which would otherwise be called injustice. If one does not have proper authority, usurpation is the term. So if one is taking authority that is not their own, to usurp somebody is to take somebody else's authority. And then lastly, if you're not based on solid evidence and facts, you're basing it on suspicion. How suspicion would not be proper. So uh, again, for a proper judgment to be made, a person must have all three of these elements on the left there of justice. And if one of those is violated, the term to express the violation is listed there on the right under injustices. We get into these different injustices in future slides. Now, when we're dealing with a judge, who is the proper judge? Well, a judge is appointed as God's servant, according to St. Thomas. So a person is acting in some degree, if validly given that authority as a judge, they're given the authority to, in some sense, stand in for God as a judge in this world, anyway. Very high standards, as you can imagine. Uh, One who is in grievous sin should not be a judge because they are standing in for God. And when we look at that line, judge not lest you be judged. Well, if you're very guilty of injustice, then you probably should not be the judge. A person who is very just, very virtuous, they would be properly called to be a judge if judgment is to be made. And because now nobody is perfect, every judge is falling short of perfection. Don't want to judge not lest you be judged. Um, so therefore, every judge, every time a judge makes a judgment, they should do so with great uh, duty to their position, and they should do it with humility and fear. They should be pompous and boastful in their judgments. They shouldn't be caught up in their own righteousness when they're judging another. They should see themselves first among sinners and then make the proper judgment call. A few other things dropped in this section in the responses. There can be no judgment of divine things. Right? Nobody is made to be a judge of the divine. And judgment comes from benevolence and never through bitterness of heart. So why does a judge judge? For love of justice, for love of fairness, for their duty to God. Right? They do it not out of pompousness or a sense of revenge in a negative sense, but in terms of creating equality, creating a virtuous situation. Why do laws exist? To direct human beings towards living a virtuous life. And they only direct human beings towards living a virtuous life if they're enforced. And that is the job of the judge. So it's very noble uh, uh, duty. Therefore, they should be it should be done with humility, with fear, and with love. Now, how about those judgments based on suspicion? That third of the steps to being a good judge. The vice was suspicion, not basing it on facts. Um, St. Thomas says suspicion denotes evil thinking based on three causes. He loves his threes. Um, One, from a man being evil in himself, so therefore he thinks all others are also evil. Um, uh, this is also very similar, though, to the second one, which is a man being ill disposed towards another. Yes, the difference between the second one and the first one is the second one could be applied more narrowly versus the first one, which just seems like to be very unhappy, maybe a very unhappy person and not very likable to oneself or to anyone else. Somebody who's truly wicked, maybe a mobster might think you can't judge another because the things you've done yourself. Versus the second one, which is you really just don't like this person, right? You really don't have a is the person innocent or guilty? Well, I don't like him, so he's guilty to me, right? Perhaps in the current political crime climate, a jury might be ill-disposed towards police officers, for example, thinking officers have taken advantage of their status for too long, and therefore, because of racial justice, no matter what the actual circumstances of the case might be, uh, they're going to find the police officer, guilty because it's some way to try to correct something that had been wronged long ago. Some of these things can come about, and they would say that St. Thomas would say that these are not good good reasons. They are perversities, which would make them a violation of the first duty of judgment, which is to seek actual justice. If you just think everyone's evil, that's not seeking justice. If you don't like this person, you're ill disposed towards this person, well, that's not justice. You have to be honestly seeking justice. Well, this third one I think is the more interesting one. St. Thomas has a somewhat negative view of old people. It comes up again and again. He uses Aristotle rhetoric. Old people are very suspicious, for they have often experienced the faults of others. So St. Thomas says about this, old people are very suspicious. Well, maybe they are. But he says this is not as perverse as the first two, because the old people are suspicious because they have seen the faults of others so frequently that they might see somebody and go, "Oh, I know how this is going to end," um, because they've seen it before. So there's some degree of certainty, at least within their minds. There's some degree of certainty of the judgment that they're making. So, but because there's some degree of certainty, it's less suspicion and more certainty. So he still doesn't mark it as a good thing. You can't just say, well, because you're old and you've seen a lot before, therefore your judgment is automatically correct. Not necessarily. He tends to think that they're jaded, but because it's more based on certainty rather than suspicion, even if it's incorrect, he considers it not as bad as the first two. Now St. Thomas talks about the 3 degrees of suspicion, uh, and the different levels as well built into it. So when a man begins to doubt another's goodness from a slight indication. Now these are things that are often done, right, at an informal level, probably not um, in a legal system with a judge, probably not. Maybe Judge Judy, right? Maybe with these talk show judges where they just have some type of slight indication that this person isn't telling the truth, therefore they might judge against them. But we do this very frequently outside of the legal system, I think, where there's just somebody and they haven't really done anything wrong, but you just get a sense about it. You get an indication. I might say the spider senses are tingling. Um, where we might be just picking up on little things and we make big decisions based on it, judgments about people based on some things that are subtle. Now, some of these we're more aware of now than perhaps before, and there's two points of it. One positive, one negative. One is, we're told, maybe you should listen to that voice in the back of your head. Sometimes people get a sense that I feel like I'm being followed, or I feel like I shouldn't trust this person. I'm going to make sure I lock the door. And it turns out that, that their suspicions were correct, and that their intuition is what saved them. So sometimes, we do say things like, listen to your intuition. Sometimes it's, your subconscious telling you something that you can't quite pick up on, but your animal instincts deep down are catching it. So in some sense, we believe in that. In other ways, like I said, we're more sensitive to it because some of this can deal with intrinsic biases that we might have that aren't positive at all. You might think, well, that person's clothes are a little dirty. I don't know about them, or I don't really I don't really like their choice of outfit for this job interview. I don't really. What were they thinking when they picked that? Sure. Um, or the way that their accent sounds, or these things can end up because can lead to uh, bigger judgments that aren't particularly good. Maybe the person is poorer than the people you normally hang around with, and that's why they picked that outfit. But they've worked hard and they went to school, and they're very qualified for this job, and this job could change their life in a positive way. And you made a judgment on their whole qualifications based on you didn't like their shirt. Well, that's one of those judgments. Implicit race, a kind of subtle racism, subtle sexism. So, some of these things that they're subtle, they're not overt. It's something that you might not even can articulate, but sometimes we have these subtle things that where we make decisions, and those, if we're not aware of it, could actually be pretty bad. In effect, the materiality of it might be bad. So that's a venial sin. Well, anything taken to an extreme would be mortal if it lacked charity. Uh, when a man has a slight indication, esteems another man's wickedness as certain, well, that one is really worse. So if you just say, there's something about that person's sure, it makes me not, or the way that they dress that makes me not want to hire that person or to accept that person. Um, if it's just slight, like, I don't know, that's venial. If you go, oh, that person wore that, not a chance, right? No way, right? So you made a complete judgment of the person based on something very slight. Um, these are really the petty things, right? But we do these things. People sit around and drink tea and coffee and have a glass of wine or a beer, and they're talking about people, and they make these judgments. Sometimes very certain things like, well, this person said that, well then I condemn their entire person because they said this thing that was a little bit off color, right? So these things can be quite serious because they clearly lack charity. When a judge condemns a man on suspicion, this is the worst of them all because really a judge is really supposed to uh, implement justice. Remember, a judge is kind of standing in for the place of God in some ways. A bunch of people sitting around drinking wine and judging people walking by, that's bad. But we don't expect much from people drinking wine and talking about people walking by. But a judge really should be quite sober and serious with fear and humility and charity. And they're, they have the ability to take away somebody's freedom, lock them up, or to take their life. If they do that based on suspicion, well, that's quite serious, quite perverted system of justice. Um, then the fourth article. Now, this one is very interesting, and I brought it up today in my class I'm teaching ethics. This benefit of the doubt question. Should we give people the benefit of the doubt in our judgments? And St. Thomas says, unless we have evidence of a person's wickedness, we ought to deem him good by interpreting for the best whatever is doubtful about him. Give people the benefit of the doubt. Unless uh, if you know something specific and concrete, that's fine. But if you don't really know it, or you just have a suspicion, or you don't, then you give them the benefit of the doubt. That's the trick. And St. Thomas said, and this is a great line, it's better to err frequently through thinking well of a wicked man than to err less frequently through having an evil opinion of a good man. Because if you have an evil opinion of a good man, you've really committed an injustice. Really an injustice. Um, So it is, it came up in the context of the class where one of the students was talking about giving a homeless person money and saying, well, or food, saying, well, I don't really know what they're going to do with it, but sometimes you just give people the benefit of the doubt, right? You give people, I'd rather err by being too generous than err by being too covetous. That would be the goal. St. Thomas in Article 5 deals with the question of should the judge follow written law? And very interestingly, the contra argument in it from St. Augustine says, during the law-making process, people can have all types of opinions about what the law should be. But once the law is firmly decided, then a judge just follows the law. It's not up for debate. It's not up to fight it. Once it's the law, it's the law. Now, this is the contra argument. But St. Thomas has a more nuanced approach to it, as he typically does. He talks about first there are two types of laws, and we still talk about these today. It's amazing uh, how relevant he is to even present day situations in politics. There are natural rights. These are sometimes today we would call them negative rights. the rights to be uh, left alone, which are often based on the natural precepts, natural human right laws, um, basic laws that govern the way that we are to be given certain freedoms within our culture and society. Then the second one is by some agreement between people, which we call a positive right. So these are things that are like healthcare or education or what else? Well, anything that requires something of other people. Natural rights don't typically require anything of anyone else, but positive rights is an agreement within society. So um, I tend to think of natural rights based on the idea of nature being God-given, right? Naturally created by God, versus positive rights, which is an agreement between two individuals within society, very much a human laws. Um, so St. Thomas says both of these, though, are codified into written law, and a judge should follow the law, or else they might fall short of both the natural or the positive rights. Uh, Now you can see that, well, this could be a problem. If you think about the church today, are we really saying, well, we just follow the law? That's it. We just follow the law. Whatever the abortion law is, the euthanasia law is, whatever the government decides to do to religious organizations, whoa, just follow the law. What can we? No, that's not what the church does. That's not what we do. But what this is all even codified in St. Thomas, where he says in his response to Objection 1, he says, however, the written law contains anything contrary to natural right, it is unjust and has no binding force. So, uh, although he seems to say the judges should just follow the law, if the law violates natural rights, then it has no binding force. That's probably what the church says today. I think that's quite clear that the church does not bind itself to unjust laws that are based on natural rights, divine rights. Can a judge be perverse by being usurped? Now, this is using two of those terms that were the vices to justice, if you recall. Usurped, if you remember, is uh, not having authority. So if you don't have authority to judge, um, is that perverse, otherwise meaning unjust? So, in short, what it's saying is, if a person without authority makes a judgment, is it unjust? Is it not justice? I think that's going to be fairly straightforward answer. So, uh, a person who is not in a position to make a judgment uh, cannot make a judgment. Okay, you don't have any authority to make a judgment, therefore your judgment would be unjust. And if a person tries to make a judgment when they don't have the proper authority, um, they make mistakes because they don't have all of the evidence. Now, this is quite clear, and this should be quite clear to us. Um, how many people in their everyday lives, you're just judging your neighbor, you don't know all of the details. Just like my example I gave with suspicion. If you're judging this person applying for a job interview, you don't really know all of what they've been through and what has brought them here. Um, you're going to judge them just based on suspicion alone. You don't know all the details. So it's the job of a judge, and also this now applies to other people who have authority, right? The employer. Um, if they have a suspicion against somebody, what's going on with this person, I just feel like something's a little bit off. it's the job of that employer then to inquire, ask questions, look for evidence, find something concrete. Find something concrete that says, okay, I don't want this person. Right? If it turns out, oh yeah, this person just got out of jail for embezzlement. Well, now that's concrete. Now you can make a judgment based on that if that's what you decide. Um, but most of us we're making judgments based on things that we don't know the most about. Some of that's because we don't really have the authority to find out. So this becomes injustice in many ways. Um, and you see that's very common also within the church itself. Even very devout members of the church, I think, can sometimes fall into this being usurped by usurping, rather. You see fairly frequently people, laymen, uh, particularly men, laymen, men, who attack Pope Francis or attack this bishop or that bishop. And if you say something like, I, who are you to be judging the Pope as a lay Catholic? And you go, well, I'm just doing fraternal correction. Of course, they're saying, making comments on Facebook like Pope Francis or this bishop is reading this Facebook post on some comments page or something like that. I don't think Pope Francis has the time to be reading your comments page, so I'm not sure that this person would be properly giving fraternal correction. But beyond that, to this point, um, you are not the Pope's equal. You have no authority over the Pope. Um, it is the authority of the Pope to give you correction. Right? It's the job of the Pope to give correction to the faithful. It's not the authority of the faithful to correct the Pope. It's not the Pope has people who he has as his equals, the College of Bishops. That's built within the structures of the church. That he is accountable. Uh, he has the Holy See that really holds him accountable. Well, he has his colleagues and he has his authority, but you're not his boss, right? We do this quite frequently in many regards, from politics to um, church to businesses. There's many things we do this to, where really, if we have no authority over something, then what good is your judgment? Right? What good is your judgment if it doesn't have any authority um, to make any difference? Why are you even saying it? What could you do with that energy? You could pray for them, you could support them, um, and you can do other good things that you do have control over. Right? If you don't like that Pope Francis said this thing, okay, well then volunteer at the food pantry and help the poor. Right? You can do that. Do that then. Don't you have nothing there's nothing you can do about Pope Francis. There's nothing you can do about President of the United States unless it's an election season. There's nothing you can do about it. Right now, we're in the period of Joe Biden. Joe Biden's the president for the next 4 years. Nothing you can do about it. So you can either get all upset, you can be making judgments all the time. You don't have any authority at this point. So do what you can do, right? Do good that you can do, and don't spend energy on the stuff that isn't within your authority. Uh, I know this isn't probably a popular opinion, but it is perhaps one that would give more people freedom if actually it just allowed themselves to be within their particular state of life rather than trying to run everybody's state of life. Just aim at doing what you can do. If I know Bishop Robert Barron talks about this a little bit in terms of women's ordination too. If your view of women's ordination is that the primary goal is to get women equal to men, well, then you've missed the point of the priesthood, right? The goal of the church isn't to get people into leadership and into power, right? Power isn't the goal of the church. It's sanctity, it's holiness, it's obtaining heaven. That's the goal. It's love. Um, now, can women do these things within the church? Absolutely. After Christ, the highest saint is the Blessed Virgin Mary, a woman who was not ordained. So you can either be mad at the church because they're not ordaining women, and you can be protesting, and if you want to do that, you can do that. But or you could try to become a great saint. What's going to the option is up to you. You can either go into bitterness over things you have no authority over, or you can find ways to express love. When you get to the final judgment and get before Christ, I think He's going to want to see that we did the best we could do with what we were given. The limitations we have, we are all limited in some way. So, in conclusion, I know this section was a bit longer, or I'm a bit longer winded than usual, but judgment is an act of justice. Right within the terms, it's an act of justice. A judge is a manifestation of justice. It's lawful for a judge to judge, quite obviously. So, it's not lawful for everyone to judge, but for those who are in proper authority, who make proper judgments, and do it based on proper facts rather than suspicion, are all able to judge. If you lack any of those three elements, then you should not be judging. You should not make judgments based on suspicion. It's quite clearly described. Benefits, one should give the benefit of the doubt to people. If you don't really know, then give people the benefit of the doubt. If you're wrong, you will rather be wrong by being too generous than being wrong by being too covetous. Judgment should be given according to the law. St. Thomas says, really, the written law, because it encapsulates both natural rights and positive rights, but if it comes down to the written law being contrary to natural rights, then the written law isn't binding in that regard. And lastly, judgment without authority is unjust. So if you don't have the proper authority to judge a situation or a person or an action, then your judgment is unjust. It's unjust. It's perverse. Doesn't have the proper authority. So that's all we have for this time. We look forward to the parts of justice in question 61, and I will see you all soon.